Before the story unfolds, take a moment to tell us. Have you ever witnessed someone being misjudged just because of how they look? Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to tap the like button if stories like this speak to your heart. Elijah Monroe didn't speak much, but when he did, people listened, though not always for the right reasons. At 17, he had mastered the art of silence in a world that rarely gave boys like him the benefit of the doubt. He lived with his grandmother, Clara, in a modest brick house on the edge of Willow Ridge, a sleepy, picturesque town in Vermont where the streets were quiet, the neighbors polite, and the prejudices tucked just beneath the surface like roots waiting to trip you. Clara, once the town's librarian, was a woman of quiet strength and weary bones, her warmth woven into every shelf and photograph in their home. She had raised Elijah after his mother passed, filling his days with literature, music, and love, trying as best she could to protect him from a world she knew all too well. Elijah adored her. She was his reason for everything. When he wasn't in school or working afternoons at the local car wash, he spent his evenings sketching watch mechanisms and listening to Vivaldi on the old record player his grandfather had once used. Time fascinated him. The precision, the order, the feeling that somewhere, even in chaos, things could be set right again. He had been saving for 6 months to buy her something special for her 80th birthday, a gift that would carry meaning beyond the object itself. In the window of Franklin's Time and Fine Jewelry, nestled between 2 antique bookstores on Main Street, sat a vintage silver pocket watch that had belonged, according to the display, to a train conductor in 1896. It wasn't the watch's price that made Elijah hesitate. It was the store itself. Franklin's was the kind of place where you were expected to dress a certain way, speak a certain way, be a certain kind of person. And Elijah, despite his pressed shirt and neatly combed hair, never quite passed the test. Still, he returned to that window every Friday after work, eyes fixed on the watch, imagining the look on Clara's face when she unwrapped it. That vision was stronger than the discomfort he felt. Stronger than the shopkeeper's gaze that followed him like a shadow whenever he stepped too close to the door. Elijah had learned to shrink himself, to soften his voice, to keep his hands visible at all times. He believed that if he was careful enough, respectful enough, kind enough, he would be seen for who he truly was. But invisibility has a cost, and it wears on the soul like water on stone. No matter how many smiles he offered or how clean he kept his sneakers, Elijah knew the truth. There were still places where he was unwelcome without anyone ever needing to say it. He carried that truth like a weight in his chest, unspoken but always present. The people of Willow Ridge knew Clara Monroe, respected her, but they didn't know Elijah. Not really. They knew his skin before his story. He often wondered what it would take for that to change. A scholarship? A headline? Or something more tragic. But in the meantime, he stayed small, quiet, focused. He had one goal, to save enough money for the watch before the end of the month. That watch, he thought, would be more than a gift. It would be a symbol of love, of time reclaimed, of being seen. And so, unaware of what awaited him behind the polished glass of Franklin's store, Elijah crossed the street one warm afternoon with hope in his chest and a folded envelope of cash in his pocket. If you're still with us, you're only beginning to discover the truth behind Elijah's quiet strength. Stay until the end to see how one moment turned a hidden wound into a powerful voice, one that would shake the entire town. The door chimed softly as Elijah stepped into Franklin's Time and Fine Jewelry, the quiet click of polished wood under his sneakers echoing in the nearly empty shop. The space was pristine, glass counters reflecting rows of timepieces, each one gleaming with the kind of dignity money could buy. Arthur Franklin stood behind the register, polishing a gold bracelet with slow, meticulous care. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. Elijah approached with calm confidence, clutching the folded envelope in his hand. He politely asked to see the silver pocket watch in the display case, the one he had been admiring for weeks. Arthur hesitated, eyeing him for a long moment before retrieving it. As Elijah held the piece, admiring the engraving on its back, something unexpected happened. The velvet beneath the display shifted slightly from the movement, and as Elijah leaned in to examine the chain, the watch slipped from its place and dropped into the gap behind the fabric lining, completely out of sight. He froze, confused, then looked up to explain, but Arthur's voice had already hardened. "Where is it?" the older man demanded. "I watched you take it." Elijah's heart pounded. "I didn't, it just fell behind the—" But Arthur wasn't listening. His fingers reached for the phone, and within minutes, the silence of the store was broken by the wail of approaching sirens. Elijah stood in place, unmoving, as two officers entered the store, the tension thick enough to choke on. Arthur's accusation was calm but firm. The boy stole the pocket watch. I saw him. Elijah tried to speak, his words tumbling over each other, insisting that the item had simply fallen behind the lining, that it wasn't in his pocket, that they could just check, but his voice felt like it was swallowed by the air. The officers didn't ask to check the display. They didn't search behind the glass. They only asked Elijah to turn around. His hands trembled as cold metal closed around his wrists. Customers passing by the storefront stopped to watch, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. No one stepped forward. No one spoke up. As Elijah was led outside, eyes lowered in humiliation, a teenager across the street lifted her phone and started recording. He felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from something heavier, betrayal, disbelief. This wasn't about a watch. It was about what they saw when they looked at him. Not a grandson. Not a music lover. Not a boy who saved for months to make his grandmother smile. Just a suspect. Back at the station, Elijah sat in silence. No charges were filed, at least not yet, but his name was entered into a system that didn't forget. They returned the envelope of money to him without apology, without explanation. His grandmother waited for him at home, worry carved deep into her face, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her what had happened. That night, the video of his arrest spread across local feeds. It was grainy, shaky, but clear enough to show the cuffs, the face full of confusion and pain. Online, the reactions were split. Some defended the shop owner. Others demanded answers. But in Willow Ridge, the sidewalks were still swept clean and the smiles still polite. Elijah stopped going to work. Stopped answering calls. He avoided the mirror, the piano, even his sketches. Something inside had cracked. Not because he had been accused, but because it had been so easy for everyone to believe it. And deep down, he began to wonder if he had been wrong to hope. Wrong to believe that being careful, being quiet, being good, would ever be enough. If this moment broke your heart even just a little, we ask you to share this story. Someone you know may need to see it, and what comes next might just restore a bit of faith in the world. Days turned into weeks, and the world outside continued as if nothing had happened. Elijah remained in a quiet orbit of numbness, his meals half-eaten, his music untouched, his sketchbook closed and forgotten beneath a pile of textbooks he no longer opened. Clara didn't ask many questions. She knew when to speak and when to simply sit beside him, their silences filled with a kind of unspoken grief. What neither of them knew was that the video of Elijah's arrest had reached someone who refused to look away. Amira Walsh, 54, retired history teacher and longtime friend of Clara's, had seen the footage and something in her clenched. She remembered Elijah as a boy, barefoot in the backyard, building little machines from scraps and asking questions too big for his age. The image of him, hands cuffed, face hollow, stayed with her like a thorn under the skin. Amira had seen enough of the world to know when something was wrong. And this, she thought, was not just wrong. It was rot beneath the floorboards, and it had gone unchecked for too long. So she walked into Franklin's store 3 days later, not as a customer, but as a witness determined to shake the silence. Arthur Franklin looked up from his ledger with the same guarded expression he always wore. Amira didn't wait for pleasantries. She asked him, directly, whether he had checked the security footage. He hesitated. Said it wasn't necessary. Said he trusted what he saw. That was when she told him that trust wasn't a replacement for truth. That she had seen the video. That everyone had. And whether he liked it or not, there was a storm coming. With reluctant fingers, he opened the archive and fast-forwarded through the footage. There, clear as day, the watch slipping behind the lining. Elijah's startled expression. No theft. No deception. Just a moment misread through the lens of bias. Arthur's face changed, subtly. A flicker of discomfort, perhaps even regret, passed through his features, but no apology came. Amira didn't wait. She wrote a letter that night, not one of anger, but of clarity. It was titled, What We Refuse to See, and she published it on the town's online bulletin and submitted it to the local newspaper. Within hours, it was shared hundreds of times. Then thousands. Her words struck a chord not because they were loud, but because they were honest. She called on the town to look inward, to ask why a boy like Elijah could be so easily condemned, and what that said about all of them. The response was unexpected. Letters poured in, some handwritten, others digital, from neighbors, former students, even strangers. Some offered apologies. Others shared their own regrets. But what mattered most were the ones addressed directly to Elijah. "You deserved better," one read. Another simply said, "I saw my grandson in your face." Elijah read them slowly, carefully, like unwrapping something fragile. For the first time since the arrest, something inside him stirred. A quiet knowing that he had not imagined the injustice. That someone else had seen him. Clara brought him a letter one morning with a slight smile. It was from a local music school offering him a chance to visit, to talk, maybe even play. He almost refused. Almost closed the door before it could open. But instead, he sat at the piano that afternoon, hands shaking, and pressed down on a single key. The sound was raw, hesitant, but real. Then another note. Then a phrase. Then a memory. In 2 hours, he composed a short piece called The Fall and Rise of Time. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It was his voice, finally returned. We believe that stories have the power to heal. If this moment gave you hope, consider subscribing to hear the rest of Elijah's journey, and the truth that still waits to be revealed. The library had never been so full. The walls, once lined with dusty hardbacks and forgotten periodicals, now held rows of folding chairs, all occupied, with more people standing near the windows and along the aisles. A sign out front read, "Time to listen, a community gathering." Clara sat in the front row, her hands resting calmly on her lap, while Amira stood near the podium, occasionally glancing back at the modest upright piano placed beside it. This wasn't a protest or a trial. It was something more intimate, an offering, a reckoning. Elijah had agreed to come, not because he sought justice or applause, but because there were words in him that couldn't be spoken, only played. When he walked into the room, dressed in a dark blue shirt with sleeves slightly too long, the noise settled into reverent quiet. He didn't look angry. He looked whole. He sat at the piano without a word, adjusted the bench, and let his fingers hover for just a moment before touching the keys. The piece began slowly, soft, uncertain, almost like a memory searching for its form. Then it grew, layered with emotion, dipping into pain, swelling into something warmer. Every note told a part of what couldn't be seen in a video. When he finished, no one clapped. Not at first. There was only silence, thick and full. Then, someone stood. And then another. And another. The room rose to its feet not with celebration, but with reverence. Among the audience was Arthur Franklin. His posture was rigid, his face pale, but his eyes didn't leave Elijah once during the performance. After the last note faded, he stepped forward, slowly, his footsteps echoing louder than they should have. He stood before the crowd, hands trembling slightly. "I misjudged him," he said. "I saw what I feared, not what was there. I can't undo that. But I can say it aloud, here." His voice cracked at the end, and he looked at Clara, then back to Elijah. No dramatic apology followed. No tears. Just a single gesture, a nod, small, but meaningful. Elijah didn't answer with words. He looked at the man, then down at the piano, and said softly, "I didn't need an apology. I needed someone to see me." That moment hung in the air like the final note of a symphony, clear, undeniable. Afterward, people lingered. They spoke in low tones. They hugged. They asked questions. The gathering, though simple, marked a shift. Not everyone changed that night, but something opened. A crack in the foundation. A willingness to see, finally, without flinching. What had once been an incident no one wanted to talk about became a conversation the town could no longer ignore. In the weeks that followed, Elijah began returning to his routines, not as a boy hiding from a wound, but as a young man reshaped by truth. He visited the local music school that had reached out to him and played again, this time with others. He reopened his sketchbook and began designing a series of watches that told stories, each one named after a memory, a lesson, a moment. The first was called Clara's Time. Another, The Invisible Boy. And one simply titled Redemption. Amira helped coordinate a mentorship program at Franklin's store, now run in part by Arthur's niece, who had grown determined to rebuild the place with a new purpose. Elijah didn't seek credit. He never asked for recognition. But his story, quiet as it was, echoed far beyond the walls of Willow Ridge. Teachers began including the letter, What We Refuse to See, in their curricula. Local schools invited Clara and Amira to speak. But for Elijah, the real change was smaller and far more profound. One evening, he sat beside Clara on their porch, the watch he never got to buy ticking softly in her hand. It had been anonymously left on their doorstep, wrapped in blue velvet. He smiled, rested his head on her shoulder, and whispered, I'm glad they saw you too, Grandma. And in that moment, it was clear, this hadn't just been about a watch. It had been about time. Time to be heard. Time to heal. Time to belong. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment sharing what it meant to you. And if you believe more people should hear Elijah's journey, share this video with someone you care about. Let's keep the conversation going, because stories like his deserve to be seen.